Douglas Bader, who lost both legs in an air crash in 1931, had to badger the RAF to let him fly planes in the war. But he proved himself to be a pilot of distinction and one of the heroes of the Battle of Britain.
But today, would a person with a disability even be welcome at a recruiting office? Hello and welcome to another edition of DNet, the Disability Network. I'm Susan Pettit.
And I'm Joe Coughlin. Today we'll look at the role that people with disabilities can or cannot play in the armed forces.
If you're an employer and you're looking for disabled workers, we have some tips coming up from members of the business community.
And we'll meet a disabled inventor who says that wheelchair design hasn't come very far since the horse and buggy days. But first, here's this week's roundup of disability news.
Quebec has been asked to create an advocacy agency for people who are mentally handicapped. Jean-Pierre Menard, a lawyer for a group of parents of mentally handicapped people, says the provincial government cannot be relied upon to assure protection and quality service. His comments came after a ruling of the Quebec Human Rights Commission. The commission had ordered a privately owned, government-financed home for the mentally handicapped to pay $1 million compensation to the residents. The parents say the residents had been subjected to humiliation and indignities.
Recently, we brought you a report on how the tourism industry is neglecting the disabled community. The situation hasn't changed much since then, but as this report shows, there are rays of hope. If you want to look to the future of accessible bus travel, you might want to look no further than this special bus, built in Winnipeg and funded by $900,000 of Transport Canada money. It contains a hydraulic lift for wheelchairs and a state-of-the-art accessible washroom. The bus is also 5 feet longer than the legal limit for highway buses, so it might be several years before such a bus is licensed to travel Canadian roads, and that leaves disabled persons who want to charter a bus out of luck. But Bill Alcock is trying to change that. He's a bus driver who by this spring will be operating the only accessible charter coach service in Canada. Licensed as a non-profit charitable corporation, Alcock plans to put a bus on the road that will contain a chairlift with tie-downs for 4 wheelchairs, as well as oxygen, refrigeration, and fresh water. Bill Alcock says the disabled community has been enthusiastic and supportive about the project, but they have been promised such services before.
And are reluctant to get overly excited until such time as the bus is in place.
Funding has been the principal problem in getting the service on the road. While Alcock is convinced that the service can break even, he says he has fallen through the cracks in funding programs, both at the provincial and federal levels. And that has left a bank loan as his only option. And even that hasn't been easy.
I have even offered personal securities, which, as you're aware, in most of this type of an operation, you should be using either borrowed money or government money.
Not the mortgage on your house.
Yeah, that's what it is. It's basically a mortgage on my house that I'm offering, and I just feel very bad about it, but it has to be done. This is something that I've committed myself to, and come hell or high water, I'm going to get this thing on the road.
The first charter is scheduled to go to Disney World this April.
Skiing has come a long way from being a sport just for the able-bodied. As this report from Minneapolis shows, increasing numbers of disabled persons are taking up the sport.
When Marty Woodkey lost her left leg to cancer 1 year ago, she assumed skiing was no longer a part of life for her.
Step.
But now things are clicking for her again. She came to Highland Hills ski area in Bloomington for the start of a 4-day program to learn to ski on one leg.
The feeling of more freedom than I have felt in about a year.
Marty flew up from Omaha, Nebraska just to take lessons.
Not quite so much muscle. All right, keep the shoulders right in the middle there. Good.
Instructor Hal O'Leary first started teaching skiers with disabilities in Winter Park, Colorado 21 years ago, when nobody else wanted to.
This is great.
When I work with someone like Marty, or anyone that has a disability, I get more in return than I put into it.
Disabled skiers first got the chance to ski in the 1940s. That's when injured veterans from World War II came home and realized they still wanted to ski. So special sleds and poles were made so they could do that. Some of the skiers had skis on the end of their poles. Some used a form of sled. Others, like Bloomington's Casey Sharmer, used a monoski. With the help of a camera, he took us for a ride. These pictures show that the thrill is still there. Courage Center program organizers say this sort of demanding activity is important.
To conquer any challenge is a big thing for anyone, and especially someone with a physical disability.
For CBS News, I'm Daryl Savage.
The Globe and Mail, which bills itself as Canada's national newspaper, has published a new edition of its style guidelines for reporters and editors. The guidelines include specific use of language for disabilities, and that's welcome news for a newspaper which has gotten itself into hot water with the disabled community over word choices such as this headline: "Shuffling cripples, retarded bring look of Dante's Inferno to life in Chinese village." The guide now shuns use of the word cripple. It also rejects terms such as mentally disabled and speech impairment. It calls both terms vague and unspecific. Overall, the Globe recommends language which does not demean or set disabled persons apart from society. And above all, it stresses that disabilities should only be mentioned when they are germane to the story. And that's this week's roundup of disability news.
Despite guidelines such as the Globe and Mail Style Book, newspapers still make lapses in judgment. If you see a slip-up in the Globe or any other publication, write to us at the Disability Network.
Coming up next, are people with disabilities welcome in the armed forces?
The military has suddenly taken on an emerging new importance. With the war in the Gulf and our tough economic times, there has been a 30% increase in Canadian Armed Forces applications. Yet despite this, the hiring of disabled people in the armed forces remains unchanged. It is non-existent. That hasn't always been the case everywhere. The famous British pilot Douglas Bader lost both his legs in a plane crash. But even this did not stop him from pursuing his first love, flying.
Will you? Roger. I'll just get this foot firmly on the ground.
Fitted with artificial tin legs, he taught himself to walk again. And lost no time getting back into uniform. But getting back into the air was another matter.
Unfortunately, we can't pass you fit for flying because there's nothing in King's regulations which covers your case.
Of course there's nothing in King's regulations, sir. That's why I was sent to the Central Flying School, to see if I could fly.
There were no rules for the disabled back then, so Bader made his own.
Have you read this from Air Vice Marshal Hannahan? Well, he seems to be on your side.
Yes, sir.
And get back into action he did, where Bader became known as the legendary Legless Ace. For many people who wind up in the military, their first attraction begins when they are young. Joshua Kumar is 11 years old and has cerebral palsy. He decided to join the Junior Navy League. Joshua's ambition is to eventually join the Navy.
Like in the computers department. Like all the communications and stuff, I'd probably go there. In certain departments, you don't need to be, like, literally physically fit. Like the armchair soldiers and stuff. The people like General Sorchkov who don't actually fight, like they're not on the front line exactly.
But realistically, what are his chances?
We're looking for an individual who is capable of going out and undergoing immediately basic training in the military. We have, in a 12-week basic training course, very little time that we devote to physical fitness. And we expect the people, and we warn the people before they go down there, that they have to be at a high level of fitness.
We asked Colonel Bryce, what if a disabled person decided to apply?
Every Canadian citizen has got a right to apply to join the military. And so what would happen to you right up front is that your application would be taken and you would be given a contact interview. But at the stage that you go off to do your medical, the doctor then would have to make a judgment on whether you would meet what we refer to as the minimum enrollment standards. And if you didn't meet that standard, then you would be counseled out for medical reasons.
Well, there's the situation with Douglas Bader, who lost his legs in combat and then got back into the cockpit of his airplane and was still combat ready after that.
And ended up parachuting from his airplane with only one of his legs. In fact, he left the other one in the airplane,
Yes.
but he spent time in the prisoner war camp.
Is that something that's not possible in today's armed forces?
I would say that given current regulations and the complexity of the current equipment, that unfortunately I don't think that Douglas Bader would get back into the forces in an operational capacity
Certainly
today.
not in a CF-18.
No. There is no question that physical conditioning is a very important factor in a soldier's ability to do his job.
When we talk about operational roles in the regular Army or in the Reserve, are there other careers that I can pursue?
Well, the fact is that the Department of National Defense has currently working for it some 38,000 civilian employees. I mean, there is almost one civilian employee for every 2 military employees. And as part of the federal civil service, these employees, of course, are subject to the same rules for employment that all other members of the public service in Canada are. And the public service, I know, has some very active programs in the fields of employment equity. And there is no doubt that within this building itself, you find, amongst the civil servant component here, you find a number of handicapped people.
If somebody came in to look for a job in the armed forces and they had a not so obvious disability, is there any reasonable accommodation that you could give that individual to make sure that they had a worthwhile job in the military?
Joe, the fact is that when a person comes to me, I cannot counsel a person out for medical reasons. That has to be done by a doctor. And even if a person comes to apply to me and has got a visible medical problem, I still, and the young people that work for me still, have to take that person's application, go through the whole process of sending the person off for medical, because specifically in order to cut down on cases where people could be discriminated against, we don't allow any of our people to make judgments on medical questions.
Would a disabled person with previous military experience be given assistance by the Canadian Armed Forces to find other work within the military?
That would be hard. I'm afraid the basic answer to that is no.
No is a word that women and disabled people have heard a lot when applying for jobs in the military. Recently, it has changed to yes for women. Colonel Bryce says the Human Rights Commission is due to review the situation with respect to persons with disabilities.
Coming up next, how to find disabled job seekers. More and more people with disabilities are out looking for jobs, and more employers are out looking for disabled workers. This week, we have some tips from employers to employers on how to find those workers who have disabilities. Earlier this week, Joe talked with Janice Brumpton, the Supervisor of Human Resources for Rogers Cable Systems, Carol Rudell Foster, the General Manager of Metropolitan Toronto Licensing Commission, and Andrew Finley, the Senior Manager of Employment Equity for the Bank of Nova Scotia.
From a lot of employers out throughout the country, I guess the complaint that I hear the most is they say, well, we can't find any people with disabilities who have qualifications. What has been your experience finding people who are qualified, and how do you get them into your organization? Mr. Finley, let's start with you.
Well, first of all, most of the candidates are qualified. We have branches across country, so we're able to try different things in terms of bringing people into the organization. Where these people are qualified, outreach recruitment is a good method, where the bank will go out and seek out candidates. Other means would include where candidates aren't quite job ready and need some skill development. There are programs developed and being offered right now that will offer them basically job entry skills that help make them ready to enter the workforce.
What kind of skills are we talking about?
Fairly basic skills, understanding the, just having a job. A lot of these people have never worked before, understanding the work environment, the office environment, understanding how important it is to come in on time and leave on time. People that have not been in the workforce yet need some very basic skill development on occasion. But these people also have great enthusiasm, and they're willing to really work at it.
Let's talk a little bit about outreach recruitment. I think it's a term that some people think putting an ad in the newspaper is considered outreach recruitment. What kinds of outreach are you doing at the Metro Licensing Commission?
We use an agency that specifically is committed to providing people for us to interview who do have handicaps, but who they assess as being suitable for the positions that we are advertising or wanting to fill.
How's your success rate been so far?
Excellent. We've only had one real opportunity to use the service, but they sent us very, very good candidates to interview. We were certainly happy with 2 or 3 of them that we would have chosen. One of them, as a matter of fact, refused us, but we're very, very happy with the person we selected.
Now, Ms. Brumpton, in an organization that's growing in the cable service business, it seems to be growing quite rapidly. You've got some opportunities to put some people into place that have a physical or mental disability. What are you doing?
Right. We basically spread the word among several agencies, such as the CPA, the Ontario March of Dimes, the CNIB, and they basically trained and referred qualified candidates to us.
And how's your track record been so far?
Excellent. Very good.
What kinds of skills are people coming to you with?
Basically, they have computer skills. For example, the Ontario March of Dimes has a computer training program where they presented 2 qualified persons to us who we immediately hired. So basically, a lot of computer training.
Okay, let's talk about some of the training that is available for people. Are people coming to you with the kinds of training that they need to get jobs in your organizations, Mr. Finley?
More often than not, yes. But in the bank, we tend to develop people through the system. And as a result, we have a lot of training programs in place in the bank that are part of the ongoing development of anybody's career. So we get to tap those programs and develop people that do come in.
What kinds of advice would you give to other employers who are looking at hiring people with disabilities?
Well, with an employment equity program in general, it's a super opportunity to you use it as a springboard for training, for re-examining your employment systems. And quite often we're surprised that what we believe has worked for years has not been working. And it's basically a spur to reevaluate how you do things, your policies and your practices.
Same question to you, Ms. Riddell Foster?
I think my advice would be is not to be frightened by the prospect, and when you do get into the situation, face your apprehensions right on and be open in the dialogue you have with your applicants or your new employees, and I think you can address most of the problems that might manifest themselves.
Ms. Brumpton.
It does not require a lot of effort, as many employers may think, and especially I stress from my experience, using agencies who can refer qualified candidates to you really helps you with your recruitment efforts.
Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you. Enjoyed it.
If you have any tips on finding disabled employees, drop us a line. We'll give you our address at the end of the show.
Coming up, raising expectations.
Wheelchair design hasn't changed much during the last century, has it, Joe?
Well, not really, Susan, but there have been some improvements, and I was able to try out one of the latest models recently. The High Rider wheelchair is shorter and narrower than most others. That allows for access in tighter spots. And with the press of a button, the High Rider demonstrates a really unique design feature. The user can stand right up. The chair's inventor is Tom Houston, president of Falcon Designs. He says the lack of developments in wheelchair design are in part caused by the fact that professionals and able-bodied inventors have low expectations for people with disabilities.
I think for the most part, people with disabilities are limited by the perception of others. If the able-bodied community doesn't think I can do something, then I can't do it. they're not going to give me the chance, and they've already convinced me that I couldn't do it, so why should I even try? So if they say, you could do this, and here's a tool that's going to allow you to do that, and I'm going to show you how to do this, guess what? I'm going to be able to do it.
Now, why did you invent a wheelchair that you can stand up in?
Function. We don't think about function when we give somebody a wheelchair. We think only about mobility. Function is something that's unheard of because we don't expect somebody to be able to function from a wheelchair. To be able to work, to be able to reach things, to be able to fit in existing environments and be productive is really where it came from.
How has it improved your independence in an employment situation?
I function in existing work environments without having to move all the desks and get everything out of my way. It's much smaller than a wheelchair, so it allows me more access in existing environments. It helps me in my business to meet people at eye level. It's a credibility thing. I'm an adult when I have the ability to be on my feet. I'm not treated, I'm not talked down to or looked down to. So it has a big impact on the people that I come in contact with and deal with as a business person.
Now, what other things can it do for you around the house, in the office, getting in and out of your van?
Well, it helps me in all those places. It helps me in the existing environment, like when I go to the store. If you think about a grocery store and all the high shelves, you think about the narrow checkout lane, you think about all the places that are really inaccessible to a wheelchair, or all the public restrooms that are inaccessible, or all the restaurants that the tables are too close together. What it does is relate to a freedom. You see, you have a freedom to go there, and I don't because I don't fit in my wheelchair. This fits much better because it's 5 inches narrower than my wheelchair. It's 5 inches shorter, so it becomes a freedom. I can now go more places because I fit there. And so it relates more than just home and work. It relates to every aspect of what I do. It also begins to build a desire for me to go do that. At one time, I lost the desire to even go because I couldn't get in there anyway, and somebody else had to go do it for me. So then I said, gosh, why did I load myself up in the car, get out in the snow, go to this store, and now I can't even get down the aisle to get what I want. Somebody else had to go down there and get it for me. So if somebody else had to do it for me anyway, why didn't I just stay home and let them go do it to begin with? And then that really happened to me, and it happens to other people. Now, because I can do it, I want to go do it. I have an incentive to want to go out and do more for myself, simply because I can.
In your opinion, what's the biggest challenge that people with disabilities in North America face today?
Awareness. And certainly access is an issue. I don't advocate that we stop working on access, but we have to start working on better technology. Certainly people in wheelchairs are, to the rest of society, are back in the horse and buggy days at the turn of the century. I mean, our equipment hasn't changed much. Mankind went from horse and buggies to outer space in the last century, and people in wheelchairs went from wood and wicker to metal and vinyl. You know, we haven't made much of a technological change, and the High Rider to me certainly represents a direction, a new direction that says we could probably build better, more functional tools for people.
Ooh, that looks expensive. How much does it cost?
$15,000. But Houston argues that if it makes someone employable and not reliant on the healthcare system, the chair could pay for itself within 6 months. By the way, aside from all its uses at home and at work, the chair allows Houston to play golf. He shoots in the low 90s.
Wow. Well, I guess the chair could double as a golf cart.
That's true. And that's our show. I'm Joe Coughlin.
And I'm Susan Pettit. See you again next week.
As promised, here's our address. The Disability Network, CBC, Box 500, Station A, Toronto, M5W 1E6. That's the Disability Network, CBC, Box 500, Station A, Toronto, M5W 1E6. Or you can fax us at 416-975-5636.